Okay, welcome back. Going back to this idea of what kind of hero a romanticist would privilege versus an Enlightenment figure or text. We talked about the Byronic hero on one side, that loner, that misunderstood artist, that person on the outside, a bit of a rebel. He was the first person in what we call the early modern era to put graffiti on the Parthenon ruins in Athens, Greece. I guess that makes him kind of like a punk. Um, so there's all kinds of transgression going on with him. And again, Satan is portrayed that way too, but in a hero, like I said, a heroic way in Paradise Lost. Um, the romanticist wants freedom on their terms, the freedom to think the way they want to think. It comes with a price, but they want that liberty. The Enlightenment hero, like I said before, is going to be working within the confines of a rational system as a scientist, or as perhaps a person working in a very organized, structured hierarchical system such as a government or the military. Another way of looking at it in pop culture, I'll use two big like fantasy slash sci-fi examples. In fact, if you wanted to call something romanticism versus enlightenment, fantasy tends to be on the romanticist side of things if you're looking at that kind of speculative fiction. Science fiction tends to be more on the enlightenment side, depending on how much real science it's based on. Star Wars, especially if you consider the first two movies, maybe, A New Hope, Return of the Jedi, those movies are romanticist in nature. They're about this ancient force or magic that helps people control things and, find their destiny. And they use swords to fight each other, and a young boy is aided by a wizard. That's all very romanticist. On the Enlightenment side would be like any of the more recent Star Trek series on TV, which has some basis in science. I would say like Star Trek: The Next Generation, where we've got somebody like, say, Lieutenant Commander Data. I mean, he's a scientist. He's very rational. Even Captain Picard, too. He's a rational, structured thinker who puts everything into balance, or attempts to, even though he has emotions. Not a perfect analogy, but, things that are just enlightenment through and through may not be the most exciting things to watch or view. I believe I just did iambic pentameter. Anyway, you can go back and scan me on that to see if that's correct or not. But I think that's a good enough discrimination at this point, or a good enough delineation, rather. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the man of the hour, Nathaniel Hawthorne, looking young and dashing there. Breezy hair, high collar. What do we need to know about him? Well, first of all, is that he does have history that goes all the way back to the Puritans and some of the earliest colonists. So his family's been here a while. They're established. They have a history. I mean, America, you can remember, gets talked about as a place without aristocracy and without nobility. But you're already starting to see the accumulation of grand old names, the families that have been here longer than other families. So you're kind of starting to see this separation, this hierarchical impulse occurring in social spheres in the United States. He's a very private person, difficult to know in social contexts. In other words, he never wore his heart on his sleeve. You wouldn't know what he was thinking. And you can see something very similar in a lot of his fiction, too. There are things that are definitely unknowable. going back to that previous slide, all of that Romanticist stuff is going to be right up Hawthorne's alley. We're going to see a lot of those elements in Young Goodman Brown. Like other writers with Gothic or I tend to like the word dark Romanicist literary leanings. He left ambiguity in his art, and that way, in that way, he forced readers to come up with their own interpretations and their own sense of meaning to it. There's this sense that you have to make a decision at the end. But the thing is, with a lot of good pieces of art, it's not going to give you one easy path over and over another. You may find yourself vacillating or sliding back. Was it reality, or was it just in his head? You know, was there a ghost, or is this person insane? That kind of thing. We started to talk about that literary network that was growing in the United States. You've got Hawthorne chumming around with people such as Emerson. Thoreau will come up too soon. Margaret Fuller will come up too soon, and also Herman Melville. So there starts to be this sense of an American literary scene. It's still in its infancy, but there is something about it that is different from just the readings of anywhere else in the world. I'm not saying better necessarily, but it's developing its own voice, its own characteristics. A lot of you know Nathaniel Hawthorne, of course, from The Scarlet Letter. Still is on most people's, most districts' reading lists. I read it as a sophomore in high school. I did not at the time appreciate it. I'll be super honest with you. I found it a little slow and long-winded. Going back and looking at it now, I certainly appreciate it a lot more. I was very impatient, I suppose. But given that that's his big book, it's important for us to think about, because it does something that's really important to American literature at this time. And even though it was considered scandalous, degenerate, heretical when it was first released, it becomes this huge commercial success. In other words, people are buying it. You know, I mean, just talking about adultery makes it degenerate or scandalous or heretical at this point in time. And what it does is it shows a heroine, Hester Prynne, who is not necessarily punished beyond all redemption because of this adultery. Now, what it does show is that many people were upset because Hester Prynne did not suffer for her actions. And they thought, now what the reaction to this book does show is that there are many people in powerful positions in American society and British society too that thought it was scandalous because Hester Prynne did not suffer because of her adultery, or did not suffer sufficiently. She ends up persisting. And in the meantime, Reverend Dimmesdale really does not suffer any consequences at all. I mean, he was part of the couple that made this child, but he somehow gets a pass. And this relates to all kinds of representations of womanhood and female agency and sexuality that we see in literature, but also in film. If you think about films that show a woman who likes to date or have relationships or have sex without being married, in earlier years, and this goes for literature too, those things were allowed to be represented as long as the woman suffers at the end. She has to pay a price for not staying within her compass, if we want to go back to that 18th century term that we've already discussed. Let's take a little look-see at some important passages within Young Goodman Brown. On page 346, you get this idea that Goodman Brown's wife, Faith, already has an idea of something bad that's going to happen. She talks of dreams. This is about a third of the way down the page, and truth coming through dreams or hallucinations or some kind of non-traditional, non-normative cognitive experience tends to be something that falls into the Romanticist realm, right? So there's something beyond kind of the reasonable ego-controlled brain that leads people to a sense of knowledge through dreams or hallucinations, altered chemical states of the mind, etc. And in the next paragraph, Brown felt himself justified in making more haste on his present evil purpose. So now we get an idea that Brown really is going to go do something evil, but we don't know what that evil thing is. There's this ambiguity already built up. And in the very beginning of the story, we are just pretty much just like jumped right into it. Young Goodman Brown came forth at sunset into the street of the Salem village. Right there. Okay, what am I supposed to get out of this? Notice he immediately sets it in Salem, home of the witch trials. Also, a place several hundred years ago during the Puritan era. So he's hearkening back to his Puritan ancestors in some way, but putting them right there at that focal point, that ground zero of what might be considered the originary moment of dark romanticist art and literature for American culture. And to continue on, Brown's wife's name is Faith. Faith kept me back a while, he says there, and there's an ambiguity that's already built in, especially since the word faith starts the sentence. Is he talking about faith as wife or the virtue of faith? We can't really know, and we probably aren't supposed to know. And this other figure that looks like Brown, he's carrying a staff, and it bears the likeness of a great black snake. Snakes, of course, having this iconography of being associated with the devil. And it's so curiously wrought, this is top of page 347, that it might almost be seen to twist and wriggle itself like a living serpent. This, of course, must have been an ocular deception assisted by the uncertain light. Now, notice the wording here. It might almost be seen to twist and wriggle itself. Now, does he mean this is what Goodman Brown is seeing, or is this what the reader is seeing, or some other viewer? There's this almost half theme of voyeurism, of hidden viewing by somebody else looking in on Goodman Brown during this story. And that too feeds into that romanticist notion, the idea of secret knowledge or secret understanding. So there is all of that. Then moving on, we do see the staff seeming to wriggle in sympathy on page 348. There's a little bit here back and forth. They begin to talk about Goody Cloyce. Goody is a word that doesn't make sense to us in a contemporary way, the way it did back for the Puritans. Goody was actually a term of respect. It was a truncation or shortening of the word good woman. It may in fact be the origin of where we get the term goody-goody, but I have not double-checked that. So let's just put that in the dark romanticist kind of ambiguity zone with everything else in this story. She talks a bit about witch ingredients on the bottom of page 348. And we do also get this sense of the staff turning into a snake on page 349. So again, there's all of this kind of arcane or forbidden knowledge and action happening in this forest here. And it's not like that good magical kind of like Gandalf wizardry. It's something that is turned towards evil or oppressive or horrific ends. And this is going to end us right here. We'll pick it up in the next video.